This video is on the Bible, part of the series of To The Point videos on a single topic. And this is from my main website, and just as a heads up, I'm doing away with the What in the World site that I'm going to take some of my material from. I'm going to meld it with this main one and have one site. So I'm working on that. If you see any changes on the site, that's what happened. I'm trying not to break the links. This is always a really hard thing to do sometimes. But the Bible is a big issue, especially in the conspiracy realm, because everybody seems to want to debunk it, and they don't want to debunk anything else, any other religious writing. They don't want to put any other religion under scrutiny. So the Bible is a big deal. It's been a big influence on history. And, excuse me, it's important to understand why this is, but more important for Christians to understand what this is and to use it as our measure of truth, because it is objective, it doesn't keep changing, and it is something that has withstood the test of time. As a quote I don't know if I've read before in this series goes, the Bible and the Christian church is an anvil that has worn out many hammers. No other book has been so scrutinized as the Bible for so long by so many people. So it's an important issue. It's an important thing to understand, and not from your average YouTube or blogger, armchair theologian or linguist. And this is because so many people get a little bit of information and run with it and decide that the Bible must be false. And even when you do your research, there are objective people on both sides of the issue, and even secular Wikipedia, which is certainly not predisposed to Bible or conservative ideas, admits that Jesus did exist and that he was ordered to be killed by Pontius Pilate, and he had been baptized by John the Baptist. These are very universally recognized facts. And the Bible is going to be the most authoritative book about Jesus. Who else would write about him but the people of the area? And the fact that Jesus did not travel to India or any place else. In fact, this was one of the criticisms the people of his hometown made against him, is because they took offense at his teachings because he was an ordinary guy as far as they knew, and he had not been widely traveled and widely educated. So the fact is that the Bible is where you're going to find the primary source for everything about Jesus and the Christian faith and original Judaism. Not the Talmudic Judaism, but the biblical kind. And the Bible is the authority by which these things are defined, because that's where they originated. So if anyone wants to make up a new definition of what it means to be a Christian because they don't want the Bible to say what it says, they are making up their own religion. So Christians who call themselves Christians and recognize the Bible as God's word need to know it well, because it is under constant attack. Now, as I have here on my document, this topic is by nature something that requires more than summaries. It's an attack upon data and evidence, and logic and reason, I might add. So such things must be examined in detail. Below is a collection of links by general topic to make it easier to quickly provide links in response to those proposed by opponents of the Bible. Such opponents rarely do their own research, but instead copy and paste from sites with names like Evil Bible and Infidels, so they deserve the same kind of response. In other words, if you're going to copy and paste to attack the Bible, then we can copy and paste to defend it. If any summary can be given, it is that most criticisms of the text of the Bible stem from baseless claims and poor logic, as well as a double standard, since such pressure is never brought to bear upon any other ancient writing. That is, by the standards demanded by the Bible's opponents, the writings to which they appeal fare far worse. So the Christian apologists must learn not only to defend, but also to attack, which, by the way, is a polemic. A polemic attacks and an apologetic defends, to put their opponents under the same demands. In other words, if people are going to cite source documents to attack the Bible, then put those source documents under the same degree of scrutiny that they put the Bible, and just, treat them the way they treat the Bible, as fictionalized or plagiarized or written by the powers that be. just say that about all their documents, because why not? They have no better reason to say that about the Bible than we would to say about their sources. For example, challenge the claim that the Bible got its ideas from earlier pagan sources. Make them prove that this is true. Remember that oral teaching long predates written ones, so that no one can say which ideas were first. And even if such proof were ever found, point out that the same idea can arise spontaneously from more than one person. Think of the many disputes over patents or discoveries in history. In other words, no one can say which thing really came first. The date of a writing isn't going to tell you the date of the origination of an idea. So the thing is that these ideas that attack the Bible are very much not established facts, okay? And certainly less scrutinized and less tested than the Bible has been. Here we have a list of links for the earliest manuscripts of the Bible. You can go to university library sources and read these things. This is not Wikipedia. This is not YouTube or Blogger. This is university sources. Take that as you will, but I would remind you, Bible critic, that if you get your sources to attack the Bible from these same universities, then you can't dismiss my sources. And you can see, I'm not going to go over each one of these links. I'm just going to list them. I'm not going to visit each link. We have this, not all of them are university sources, but they are sometimes collections of university sources, or at least scholarly ones, whether they're associated with a university or not. This one is all about the Old Testament. This one is about how to put a date on New Testament manuscripts. This is Duke University. We have another link about collecting a lot of sources on New Testament manuscripts. We have at, let's see, I forget if this is a university or not, but it is a scholarly organization that has the Chester Beatty Papyri collection, the earliest New Testament copies, and there's the source for it. And then we have the Center for New Testament Manuscripts, New Testament Virtual Manuscript Room. You can look at copies of the, photocopies of the documents. And this is another scholarly source. University of Michigan Papyrology Collection, that is, the papyrus was the primary early document that we found all these things on. We have a part of the Gospel of John from 130 AD, the John Rylands manuscript. Okay? Now that happens to be a Wikipedia list, but you can go to those, the links from that article and check it out. This is proof that the Bible existed long before most of the added pagan theories that were read back into those teachings and then said to be predating the Bible. This is predated. This proves those things wrong. We have this part of the Gospel of John from within a generation of the events. So here again, no one who came later could have written the Bible. Not the Jesuits, not the Catholic Church, not the powers that be. These are ordinary documents by ordinary people who witnessed things they saw and wrote them down. And of course, some of the Bible writers, such as Luke, are recognized even by the secular world as first-class historians. So they're not to be dismissed just because they're Bible writers. And we have people from such as Josephus and other early writers, other early well-regarded historians who vouch for a lot of the events of the Bible. And we also have this Bible and Science source. They are evolutionary. I strongly disagree with that, but they also go into how the dates of things are determined, and no one can accuse them. I use this source because no one can accuse them of being biased in favor of young earth creationism or anything like that. Then the canon itself, we have facts about the canon from a site called Tertullian.org. That is an ancient historical figure that somebody named a site after. Did Constantine or the Council of Nicaea determine the Bible canon? And again, not even Wikipedia thinks so. This is Britannica.com. The Council of Nicaea did not discuss the Bible canon. The council was convened by Constantine, I think, for the purpose of settling a dispute among bishops. There was squabbling and disagreement going on. He wanted unity and peace and control. And so he convened this debate between primarily Athanasius on one side and Arius on the other. Athanasius won, and the question was not the Bible canon at all. It was the divinity of Christ. Arius had been teaching that Jesus was not God, and this was causing a lot of turmoil, and so they had this debate to settle the issue. And once it was settled, Constantine ordered that that is the official view. That's all he did. He was primarily a moderator of a debate. He did not care which way the debate went. He only cared whether they reached a conclusion, and then that conclusion would be enforced. And again, it had nothing to do with Bible canon. And here is the Christian Think Tank, an excellent scholarly source that I don't know if it's updated anymore, but it's just loaded with very well-researched information about the Bible canon and a lot of other topics. This is my own Bible Canon Archives link. I suppose I should click on it to make sure it still works. Yep, still there. And this is one about the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Gnostic Gospels, such as the Gospel of Thomas, and whether these things should have been in the canon. I hear a lot of people say, well, this was taken out of the Bible. First of all, how do they know anything? How do they know what was originally in the Bible such that they can say what was taken out of it? You have to first establish and prove beyond any reasonable doubt what the content of the original Bible was before you can say what was taken out of it. The reality is, in my experience, that the people who make this claim simply found something that contradicts some key teaching of the Bible that they like better, and they decide that must be the truth. That's how this goes. That's about how deep it goes. It's very shallow. Then we have, under contradictions and reliability, debunking the Skeptics Annotated Bible. There is a site called the Skeptics Annotated Bible, and this is a site that goes through it painstakingly, point by point, and refutes each and every one of their claims. Testimony of the Evangelist. This is another university document by a guy named Simon Greenleaf, who was a principal founder of the Harvard School of Law back in the day, back before all the corruption set in. And he was an atheist, is my understanding. His law students, challenged him to apply his methods of cross-examining witnesses and evidence to the Gospels, to see if the four Gospel writers were credible witnesses and giving accurate accounts. And he wrote this document as a result of his research and how he would approach this as a lawyer. And at the end of his investigation, he decided not only the verdict was that the Gospel writers were credible witnesses, but also that Jesus really did exist, really did live, die, and rise again, and he became a Christian as a result. That's how strong the evidence is by people who have the training and the open-mindedness to truly investigate something, and he was a hostile investigator. Okay, he had no motive to reach the conclusion he did. In fact, he expected to reach the opposite conclusion. So there's a link to that. These three on inerrancy are my own documents, mostly arising out of the Bible versions debate, but a lot of things branch off from things that I study. Another question will arise, and I'll go off and write about that. So these are from quite a while ago, but this issue is important because a lot of people don't know what it means for the Bible to be inspired and inerrant. So I took 3 documents to write out what I think about that. Then on the alleged pagan roots of Christianity, we have one that debunks that. We have Zeitgeist debunked. We have a full-length video debunking Zeitgeist, and an article proving that Jesus was not Zeus. As I've pointed out before, there are instances in the Bible, in the book of Acts, where people who actually did worship Zeus were mentioned, and that the word for Zeus is quite different than the word Jesus. It's a completely different word in Greek. They are completely different roots. They do not come from the same sound or anything. So people who think Jesus sounds like Zeus are simply ignorant and unstudied and just going with whatever they find copied and pasted that sounds good to them because they don't want Jesus to be real or to be God, and they want Christians to be stupid. But the fact is, we're not the stupid ones. If you do your research, you can find this stuff, and it is not true that Jesus was Zeus. Neither is it true that Jesus means earth pig. That is another gross misunderstanding of Latin and Greek and every principle of logic and linguistics. As for tampering with the Bible, it's a little stickier issue. And I've gone over it. I don't just speak and say, well, I'm going to just read it, and whatever jumps out at me as true is going to be true, and whatever I don't like must be false. That's not how you do it. I did these articles called The Phantom Pharisee and then Another Phantom Pharisee on 2 different angles on Bible tampering. And the alleged Piso family conspiracy of a Roman family that allegedly wrote the Bible. This is preposterous. It's ridiculous on its face. So you look at the content of the Bible and you can easily see no Roman would write it. And no Jew who rejected Jesus would write it. In fact, the Jews would not even have voluntarily made up the Old Testament because it portrays them in such a poor light. And there's similar arguments for the New Testament that, the disciples would not write these things that portray them as in a poor light as well, because they were often rebuked by Jesus as slow-witted, thick-headed, cowardly, all sorts of things. So, this isn't a book that people who are up to no good would write or write fiction. It just doesn't make sense. Basic document choices around a certain passage of Scripture. You can read that if you're interested. And which Old Testament text is right? That's another good read. And then we have alleged evil teachings that presume we're more righteous and compassionate than God, where we read our modern or Western sensibilities into ancient Eastern culture. One is the Jephthah's daughter as a sacrifice issue. A strange test for suspected adultery, and the main point there, let me go the first one, a main point that I would say from that, is that there is no evidence that he actually sacrificed his daughter as he would sacrifice an animal. By all indications, she was simply not permitted to marry. She would remain a virgin all her life, which was pretty much death in that culture, but she was not a literal human sacrifice. Jephthah was the stupid one. He caused this on his daughter, and she went out mourning with her friends because she would never marry, not because she would never grow up. As for the suspected adultery, this was actually a step up, because in the past, in other cultures, it would just simply be presumed that the woman was guilty and she had no recourse. This at least let people, it was the equivalent basically of throwing dice to see which, or flipping a coin to see which was God's verdict. And they would determine whether she was innocent. So she at least had a chance. Okay. And so we can't just lightly dismiss this stuff and not consider the context. And then God ordering the annihilation of an entire people. This again has to do with things that you need to know about context, especially what the Bible says about the Nephilim and the mixing of genes and strange flesh, as the term goes in the King James, if you like that. Where angels were monkeying with human genetics and animal genetics. That's where you get the myths, so-called, of minotaurs and other human-animal hybrids. This was being done. And so these areas, it is believed, are areas where this sort of thing, these hybrids were living, and they had to be wiped out. Okay? So, because yes, that sort of thing did go on after the flood as well. The Bible even says that in Genesis. And then extra biblical evidence for the Bible and Jesus. We have the Jesus of Testimony, a full-length video, and you can watch that at your leisure. It is full length. Full length usually means at least an hour and a half to 2 hours or more. Now, about the Bible versions debate. One of the most divisive teachings in the Christian community has been the claim that only the King James Version of the Bible is correct, which is usually abbreviated KJVO or KJV only. And all modern translations in English are corrupt, satanic, and heretical. Further, this teaching claims that the underlying Greek text used for the KJV is superior to all the others by virtue of it being the, quote, majority or received text, and that the KJV translation is authorized by God rather than an English king with an agenda. And yes, he did. Yes, he was. Typical catchphrases used by promoters of the KJVO are Bible believers for themselves and Bible corrupters for others. The primary character of its proponents, as has been my experience over long years, seems to be character assassination, fear, and judgment. They've been very nasty and hostile. And here are my thoughts on the issue. I have a few documents and some by others. These two documents are prompted from a discussion, a brief one I had with one of the top proponents of KJVO named Dusty Peterson. That is a pen name. It's not his real name. His real name is Neville. I can't remember his last name. And it turns out on further research, after I had finished my conversation with him and wrote these documents, that this guy is a scam artist in the UK, or at least he was. I don't know if he's in jail by now. Bilking elderly people out of their retirement savings so that they could buy a place on some island he said he owned and escape the tribulation. That's the kind of guy this was. But he is very often and widely cited by KJVO proponents. And so I happened to run into this guy in a message board and didn't know who he was at first. Okay. And then I found out, and the message board where he was a moderator, not an owner, as soon as I dared to question him, they banned me without recourse or notification. They just kicked me out the door. So that's the kind of people I'm used to running into that are KJVO. They're not scholarly. They're not kind. They don't exhibit the fruit of the Spirit that I have seen so far that are very adamant about KJVO. Then we have this entire website about it, and then a website about the perils of Bible translation, how translation works, because no KJVO I've ever met seems to understand it. This is a site called Velveteen Rabbi. This is an article by Joel Hoffman, who is a recognized scholar on Bible languages and issues of translation. I don't agree with every conclusion he draws, but he is to be regarded as a scholar on this issue. This is his expertise. Just like with Michael Heiser, I value his expertise on the Old Testament languages, but not necessarily the conclusions he draws. Another site called 15 Myths About Bible Translation that everybody needs to read, especially the KJVOs. A site that ponders the question whether the New Testament was ever originally written in Hebrew. And then more about Greek as the original New Testament language. So there's plenty there to keep you busy if you really want to know something about the Bible, and you should if you're a Christian, if you're going to call yourself one, and say that you follow Jesus. The Bible is the primary document about Jesus. It's about him from start to finish. The Old Testament pointed, you could see it narrowing down human history to the point where the Messiah would come. And then it goes back out to include, back to the rest of the world at Revelation in the New Testament. So the Bible is about Jesus. And you can't follow Jesus without knowing the Bible, at least the basics of it, which is why I wrote a handbook called Bible Basics Handbook that you can read on my book site. Now, I want to switch over to my own definition of what it means to use the literal, historical, grammatical hermeneutic. A hermeneutic is a method of interpretation. Okay, it's an approach to any document. Any document you read, you bring a hermeneutic to it, a rule book of your own, whether it's written or not, on how to make sense of the words you're reading. And it's important, it's vital to be consistent in your methods. Otherwise, you're just, you might as well not bother reading. You're just making up things as you go along, and like walking through a field, picking this flower and that flower, and then saying that they all grew together. That's pretty much what people do when they don't have an objective, consistent method of Bible interpretation. So I use the literal, historical, grammatical one, and that is going to be defined right here. By literal, we mean that unless there is compelling reason to allegorize or spiritualize a passage, it should be taken as written. This is the opposite of interpretation according to preconceived beliefs. For example, if one wishes to see whether the Bible treats miracles as actual events or simply as moral lessons, one examines the text to see whether the writer is teaching or simply reporting. On the other hand, if one has already decided that miracles are impossible, then that person would be forced to interpret accounts of miracles as moral lessons, without regard for the context. And when we consider the fact that the Christian faith hinges upon a colossal miracle, the resurrection of Jesus from the dead, and a priori disbelief in miracles is wholly incompatible with the Christian faith. In other words, if you don't believe in miracles, don't call yourself a Christian, because the Bible defines Christian as one who follows the Christ and follows him because he rose from the dead. That's a miracle. What literal does not mean is to ignore figures of speech, analogies, or genre. If, for example, we read that we are to be salt and light, the literal hermeneutic does not teach that we must become pillars of salt or oil lamps. Yet when we read that Jesus rose physically from the dead, we take it as stated, since it is in the context of eyewitness testimony rather than analogy or spiritual teaching. This distinction becomes critical at such points as when Jesus told the disciples that the bread and cup were his body and blood. It's equally critical when we read prophecy. You have to know when and where to apply figures of speech and analogies and similes and other rhetorical or linguistic devices that are descriptions that say something in an indirect way, and when something is simply being reported as a matter of fact. By historical, we mean that a passage must be considered in its context, which includes not only the writer and subject, but also the language, culture, era, and particular circumstances. We must also establish the fact that the Bible is not to be dismissed as historical record simply because it's the Bible. All historical accounts are subject to the prejudices and cultures of the historians, who are all fallible human beings. A historian writing about science can be every bit as mistaken or agenda-driven as any theistic writer. So the prudent student of history will consult many historians, many records, and take them as a whole. The character of the historian is of the utmost importance, which is why I mentioned that thing about the testimony of the evangelist and the credible witnesses, because even the most erudite prose is worthless as historical record if it omits pertinent data or twists facts. You have to know the character of the historian as best you can. Okay, and see whether they're people of high ethical standards. By grammatical, we mean that one must have a good grasp of the language of a writing. In ancient times, there were far fewer people writing at all, so there's a greater degree of consistency in a given era. But languages are always in flux, so the style of writing or use of grammar is one of the clues used by analysts to determine the approximate date of a document. So we must consider the meanings of words as they relate to other words around them, the style of the writer, the general style of the time, and of course the topic. Words are not written in a vacuum. The careful exegete, that is to say someone examining the text to get something out of it rather than an eisegete who puts words into it, the careful exegete will consider all of these factors together, and this requires a lot of time and effort. Much time is wasted debating various biblical issues due to the fact that people are not all using the same hermeneutic. If one uses a literal historical grammatical method, while another considers all of Scripture to be moral lessons, they will never reach any agreement or understanding, with each side wondering how the other can be so blind. On more focused topics such as prophecy or Christian living, the views of each side concerning various groups such as Jews, Gentiles, and Christians will determine whether they can discuss the topics at all. They must first come to agreement on the foundational presumptions before a discussion of details can begin. It's the same thing if you were doing scientific investigation. You all have to agree on what evidence is and how you can recognize it and how you can test it. Otherwise, if you're using different standards, you will never come to agreement, and there will never be any truth found because you're all running in different directions. Like, having a car race between a VW Bug and a Lamborghini and a school bus. What kind of a race is that? So in the same way, if you're going to look for truth, pick a standard, and if you're comparing your discoveries with someone who has a different standard, don't waste your time. And when it comes to the Bible, pick a standard, because everything you discuss about the Bible from that point will be a waste of time if you're talking to someone who uses a different standard. So this is why there's so many denominations. That's one of the reasons there's denominations. And even, conspiracy theorists are split into denominations, so they can't criticize us on that account. But people decide what kind of standards they're going to have, if any, and whether they're going to be consistent or not. And you've got to look at those things first, or you will be forever squabbling over what the Bible means and what it says and what it teaches. Okay, so, and if you use some kind of hybrid standard where sometimes you take it literally, historically, grammatically, and other times you don't, then I'm not even going to waste my time, because it's pointless. Because it's, like walking in a hall of mirrors or something. You're wasting your time just aimlessly wandering around. If you want to have a good discussion with somebody about the Bible especially, make sure you're on the same foundation. Okay? If you're in a rowboat and one of you rows one direction and the other direction, you're just going to spin in circles. And some people enjoy that. I don't enjoy that. Anyway, I guess that's all I have to say about the Bible text itself, because there's a lot of material you need to read for yourself. That's all there is to it. You have to do research. And if you're not going to do research, then don't go up to somebody who has and tell them how wrong they are. Present your own research, or at least collect your own research and say, this is what I found. This is, write down your conclusions or something. At least I've done that. Write down what you got out of what you read. Do the work, and then I'll know you're serious enough to actually talk about it. And if you're going to criticize me or anyone else who has done this kind of work, do your own. Be on the same level. And I don't mean that's necessarily a higher level, but certainly it has to be in this case, because it's easier and lazier not to do research of your own and not to sit and think and write things down. And of course, once you've got the text established, then you have to know how to read it. And there are objective standards that you would use to read anything that you can use to read the Bible. And that's the main points I wanted to make today. There will be a few more of these to come. I will just briefly look at my list here. These are my to-the-point things. I was going in alphabetical order. I skipped when I did preterism. I went down to pre-trib rapture. Now I went back to the Bible. I might do Apostle Paul next, and then the Trinity and Universalism. And then after that, I don't know. But that's today's topic on the Bible. And once again, thanks for listening.